All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Susan, and welcome to our program, Love is Respect. We have members of Thrive Virginia here with us to teach us about abuse in its many forms and how to lead healthy and respectful lives. So we will have time for questions at the end. You're welcome to send them through the chat during the program. Or raise your hand, so to speak, at the end. But we do ask that you keep your microphones and cameras off during the program, just so it can go a little smoother. Without further ado, let me introduce our presenters. We have Rebecca Bauer, who is an intern at Thrive Virginia. She's a senior at Virginia Commonwealth University and is studying to receive her bachelor's of social work. She plans to go to grad school to become a licensed clinical social worker. And we also have Carmina Galvez, who is an education specialist at Thrive Virginia. She facilitates violence prevention programs in the counties of King William, King and Queen, Charles City, New Kent, and the town of West Point. In addition, she welcomes any outreach opportunities to promote ways that Thrive Virginia and its services could help support various community needs. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you guys.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the intro and for your time.
Yes,
of course.
Appreciate it.
All right, so I've made you all the hosts. So yeah, just let me know if you need help with anything.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen now so we can get started on our PowerPoint. All right, let's see. Can you see it? Is it up? Yes. Okay, perfect. Let me hit the present button. Nope. So me and Carmina are here today to talk to you guys a little bit about the red flags and kind of how to recognize those things in domestic and sexual violence and ways that you can offer support to survivors or anyone you know who's going through things like that. That's not high. Okay. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, more in depth. Our agenda is kind of the overview of the intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and sexual violence, and how those can look and what those kind of mean and how they differ when talking about them. And of course, the definitions and some statistics on how likely it is and other things like that. We'll kind of go over the power and control wheel and the cycle of abuse pages and kind of how those things can affect people into kind of these relationships and different ways that those things happen. Then we'll talk about some barriers as to how people kind of fall into those things and ways that victims are acerbated, I think that's how you say it, and how to support someone who's experienced these things and kind of just how to support them and some resources at the end. So some definitions for you guys are intimate partner violence. It's any behavior that one former or a current intimate partner uses to establish control and power over their significant other or their partner at the time. It's a serious issue in the United States and has causes a lot of issues with mental health and their physical health in the long run, and just an overall kind of just impact on them kind of forever. It can occur between really any romantic partners, those who live together and those who don't, so it could share the same household, it could not. Domestic violence is willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and other abusive behavior. That's kind of part of a pattern of control that's used by one person against their partner. It's an umbrella term that kind of encompasses both inter-partner violence and then family violence. So domestic violence can also mean not just a partner, but also family as well. Violence can take within a household, so it's more of a parent-child, like maybe a roommate dynamic. So that's kind of what it means when it differs from inter-partner violence. Sexual violence is any sexual act where consent is not obtained or freely given. One of the most traumatic and pervasive and most common human rights violation. Sexual violence is a serious public health issue, just as the other two are, and has a lot of long-term, short-term effects on people's physical, mental, and sexual health. So some statistics for everyone is 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some type of interpartner violence. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 40 men are victims of rape or attempted rape. The DV hotlines that are across the US receive about 19,000 plus calls per day, and 19% of interpartner violence involves some kind of weapon or something that's used to harm another. In Virginia, 33% of women and 28% of men experience interpartner violence or interpart violence like rape or stalking in their lifetime. In 2020, almost 70% of the Virginia intimate partner homicides included the use of a firearm. In 2020, 541 homicide victims, more than half of them were committed by an intimate partner. About 40% of domestic violence homicides happen during or after a relationship breakup. So it's kind of what leads to the end of that relationship, often ends in a homicide or a crime. Karina, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think too, with the Virginia statistics, right? The 33% of women and 28% of men experiencing IPV. A lot of these reports, especially for males, are often underreported. And a huge reason why male cases are often underreported is because, there is a lot of sort of stigma surrounding males, coming forward with an experience that they've had, right? So, when it comes to a person's upbringing, if you are told to not share your emotions, if you are told to sort of keep things in, or you're told that women can't be violent or women can't rape a man, right? Because men are supposed to be strong. A lot of these sort of ideas can prevent a person, whoever you are, really can't to disclose what happened to them. The same thing for women too, right? Disclosing their situation is that there's a lot of victim blaming language that happens, right? So if you're thinking about victim blaming and how how things are handled in the media or with news, that can take a lot of toll on an individual. So really keeping all those factors in mind, we may have these reports, but there may be more cases, and we just need to do a better job in building a society where people can come forward and they are believed. And so, Rebecca is going to talk about that really important fact. She talked about it in the overview of that listen, believe, refer. And that's super, super key. Even though it sounds super simple, it's super key in helping to cultivate that better society.
Thank you, Karina. So here's a little bit of a chart to kind of see different statistics on who can be a victim. This is from RAINN, the website. That looks like there's a little link below if anyone would like to go look at that. But 3 in 4, 3 in 4 people who experience rape are often known. They know that person. Only 21% are committed by a stranger. 43% are a friend or acquaintance. 27 is a current, former spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner. And the 7% are someone the victim cannot remember or by more than one offender. And 2% are non-spouse relatives. So this can look a lot different for everyone. It could be anyone, like a friend or acquaintance that you trust and then you don't know, and it happens. It can happen to anyone.
But it's really key to see, 3 out of 4 of rapes are committed by someone known to the victim. That's a very, very shocking statistics for some folks. And I think that goes back to the whole point of the victim blaming thing is a lot of times victim blaming can come from this uncomfortability of believing that this can happen to someone by someone that they know or by someone that they love, right? But, if we don't work at this, at a very early age, we don't talk about these sort of issues of consent, right? Of boundaries, of what a person's limits are. You know, these things can happen because we won't recognize what is the norm, what is healthy in relationships, right? And so that's why these sort of presentations are so important, to really start that dialogue and that conversation.
Exactly. This is the power and control wheel. A lot of times when someone gets into a abusive relationship, whether it's inter-partner violence or domestic violence or sexual violence, a lot of time they fall into the power and control wheel, and how threats are used, or intimidation of making them feel like they're insignificant, and destroying property of theirs, and just using like, this is what I do, this is what you do, like this is how I am, and kind of putting fear into their partner, along with like threats of, oh, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to hurt someone we know, things like that, to try and guilt them into making the victim feel as though they can't do anything about the issue or the abuse at hand. Another one is economical abuse. Sometimes in relationships, one person is the person who goes and gets a job and is like, oh, you can stay home, you can take care of the kids, you can take care of the home. And a lot of time that will give the abuser the power of like money over the person who doesn't work. Again, with maybe cars, or they have some kind of hold over, oh, you don't have a car, you can't go anywhere, where are you going to go? And then that also can cause someone to stay in an unhealthy relationship, along with kind of how they treat them from the beginning of the relationship, using them as like more of a housewife or like a servant, and making all the decisions for them, and thinking like, oh, well, I know what's best for us, I'm going to do what I think is best. And that definitely can make someone feel insignificant and like their opinion doesn't matter, along with blaming and like minimizing the power of abuse that they have. So making light of the abuse, like, oh, I'm sorry, like I didn't mean to do that, it wasn't unintentional, I'm so sorry, it'll never happen again. That often is used, and a lot of partners believe it because they want to believe that their partner couldn't do something that upsetting for them. And then isolating them from their friends and family. That's another big one, is how someone can say, oh, you can't do this, or they don't like me, you shouldn't hang out with them. That kind of aspect of using isolating, making them think that they're the only one that you need. And that's kind of another thing of power and control, getting complete control over your life and over what you do. Here you go, see. Would you like to add anything, Carmina?
No, I mean, I think you really encompassed all of that really well. And, you know, and taking into consideration power and control, you know, this is a huge reason why. And I think Rebecca's going to go into it a little bit later, why, you know, it's so hard for folks to leave a relationship. But I'll kind of leave that, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as Rebecca really talks about things moving forward, is really take all these pieces into consideration. And these different examples can vary from person to person based off of their identity, right? So unfortunately with this wheel, you see she, her in being in here, right? This could easily happen just the same with any male victim, right? Or anyone for that matter. If you look up power and control wheel online, actually, you'll find many different resources for different identities and abilities, right? So there's a specific power and control wheel for people with disabilities, right? So what do these specific pieces look like for them, or very common examples that you see with those certain identities or with those certain aspects? So just something to keep in mind.
This is kind of the cycle of abuse and how it can continue, and how it can first begin, and how it kind of starts, whereas there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of communication that tends to be broken down, where it's very limited, and the victim can often become fearful of how the abuser is acting or treating them, or how potentially when they argue, it's a very intense, very emotional experience, and that can make them feel as though they need to accommodate the abuser and make them feel like de-escalate kind of the situation. And then sometimes they can do that, and that's where it can turn into an incident where it's a verbal argument or emotional or even physical abuse, which often leads from like anger and then blaming the victim and arguing, giving the victim threats and threatening to take away something that the victim needs or relies on, and intimidation as well. Well, they may give the example of no one's going to believe you, and that's often a very big one that's used in abuse, is kind of explaining how the abuser, how good they look, and how the victim or survivor may not be fully believed. And then reconciliation, when the abuser understands what they've done and comes to apologize and says, well, I was really upset, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have acted that way, or you did this and that really upset me, and kind of pushes the blame back onto them, and claims that if the survivor hadn't done this, then they wouldn't have done that, and saying it wasn't super significant or it wasn't as bad as they're making it out. They're being dramatic. They're being they're just not being realistic. And then there's the calm, how the incidents were given, everything is fine again, and there's no tension. It's just smooth sailing. It's the honeymoon phase again, where there's not a lot of arguing, and so things are going fairly great, as someone may believe when they get to that stage. Here are some barriers that may increase violence. I spoke a little bit about them earlier, but lack of resources. Sometimes it's hard for someone, a survivor, to get into a shelter, or there may not be that many shelters that are allowing people at that time to come into their shelter. They're not, they don't have like animal safekeeping. So like if someone has a dog that they love, or like a farm animal that they care for, and they don't feel good about leaving it where it is, then they don't really have anywhere to take a horse or some kind of livestock animal. They may feel as though if they don't have maybe insurance or something simple as medication, if they don't have that, then they can't do things, and that may also keep them from staying in a abusive relationship. And the lack of public transportation. A lot of areas, a lot of rural areas don't have a lot of buses or ways that you can get around besides a car. So if the car is the abuser's and the survivor doesn't have one, or doesn't have their own kind of transportation, that can also lead to them potentially staying in that relationship and the violence becoming more extreme. Some medical, interpartner hospitalizations are greater in rural areas, and that kind of comes into how they couldn't get away from maybe a shelter, or they didn't have a car, and then things happen to where they just are gone to the extreme and have to be hospitalized. Accessing all of these services can be, there may be difficulty doing that before the violence gets to the part where they may be hospitalized. Sometimes a food desert. Again, in rural areas, you may need a car or something to get to these food places. There may not be a bus there, or maybe you can't afford to take the bus. Things like that can be challenging in getting yourself affordable and healthy food. And education, that kind of goes back to talking about the power control wheel on like, I know this, I'm smarter than you, and kind of going back to like blaming and like minimizing what the victim or survivor thinks about themselves. That kind of goes to, well, I got my college degree, or I got better grades. Something like that could cause them to feel insignificant compared to the abuser, and that they have to stay there and they won't find anything better. Or perhaps a lack of childcare. They could be a stay-at-home parent, and they may not be able to find a job, and that could be hard for them to find affordable childcare in their area, or even childcare at all in their area. And kind of going back to the rural areas of social and geographic isolation, things may be severely limited. They may not have a lot of grocery stores or transportation. And they may not have family members or friends in the area, or they may have been isolated, so their support system maybe isn't there anymore. So victimization might be exacerbated by kind of all of these things, again, going back to the first, economic status, in absence of that support system that they may need to leave the relationship. The dynamic of maybe the family or the family role or the household and kind of what that looks like and how they fit into that and how they may feel as though they can't be something else other than that. Kind of community ties, what kind of community resources are there for them? How can they don't have a support system, how can the community help them? What are those kind of ways? And again, with the geographic kind of location on where they are, do they have the resources they need? Things like that. That could cause the victim to possibly, or the survivor, to stay longer because they don't have these resources.
And think about too, going back to the statistic that Rebecca was talking about, the 3 and 4 of harm being done by someone they know, right? So that's really alarming in the fact that the person who has done the harm could potentially be a coach, right? Could potentially be a teacher or, a trusted member within the community, right? And so I think that's going back to the point of what Rebecca is saying here is if they have that higher level of, I just blanked on words, but if they are in a higher position where they're really valued within their community, right, that's going to change a lot of ways that people are approaching that situation or that case, or maybe even approaching how they are acting towards the person who's experienced harm. Hopefully not, right? Hopefully we don't fall into the victim blaming language, but that definitely goes into what Rebecca is saying here.
Thank you, Ian. So these are some ways you can offer support. I think that is one of the main things that you can do for someone who is in a domestic violence or inter-partner violence relationship. Is a lot of the time you're not going to be able to talk them out of it. You're not going to be able to get them to listen. And so offering support in ways that are going for them, supporting them when they need it and how they need it at that time, not trying to push what you think is best or what they think. So you should use listening and just listening to where they are mentally and physically, and kind of just being there and being a shoulder for them, being a support system. Don't blame them for this. This is often not their fault. They don't go into this looking for this. This is something that just happens, and a lot of the time it's very hard for someone to break out of that cycle of abuse, as we looked before. You can offer them resources on things that may be very small and very minimal, but it may feel like they are in control and that they can do these things to help themselves, and potentially that could help them realize that they can get out and that it's something that they are able to do. So kind of don't gossip about it to people, that's one of the things I think, if it is kind of going back to community ties, if you learn of something like this, it's often like if you say it to someone else, it's going to get back, and that could cause that survivor to shut down even more and to have a harder time letting support in and reaching out to these resources. And then believing their story, believe what they tell you, and make them feel as they don't deserve this, that they don't deserve to be abused, but at the same time also letting them make their own decisions and not blaming them for the abuse. Another thing is kind of make a safety plan with them and kind of go over like, what if this happens, and what if something is like really dangerous and very violent, like how can I help you kind of get out of it mindset, and just kind of help them and guide them through this is how I can get out if I need to.
Yeah, and that safety planning too is really important, because that time period after a person has left their abuser is really crucial, right? So the abuser could retaliate in some sort of way. And so really having a safety plan in place, whether that's having a backpack of all your necessities so that you can quickly go over to your friend's place or family member's place, or having a friend know that, hey, I'm about to break up with this person or leave this situation. So, can you check in on me in 30 minutes, give me a call, something like that, right? Some sort of safety plan is just super crucial to have because of that crucial time period afterwards. Also just want to take this opportunity to really blast our prevention program, this image is actually something that we use with our prevention program when we're teaching students from elementary to high schoolers these sort of things, right? Because it's super important. Talking about consent, talking about what do you do if a friend or someone you know has experienced this, because this, the prevention is key is what I'll really say to that. So it's a little goofy that we use this little image here, but it goes a long way.
It makes sense. It has all the things you can do to help those people who need it. Here are some resources on some hotlines for things that people may need for stalking victims sanctuary that helps those who feel as though they're being stalked and maybe there's not so much they can do about it. Then you have a lot of domestic violence hotlines, kind of the national one, the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance. That's a very good resource for kind of anything you're looking for legal and for just a hotline to kind of call and get things about that. And then there's some sexual assault resources where you can, I think there's a hotline for both RAINN and for the Sexual Violence Resource Center, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's an LGBTQ plus kind of spot words for the anti-violence program, and then Forge, and then the Trevor Project. Do we have any questions?
And of course, too, while you guys are thinking of question, there's Thrive Virginia, which is where we both work at. And so this, so this 24-hour hotline is, specifically for anyone who's experienced any form of domestic or sexual harm. So that there's our 24-hour hotline there. You can also check out our website just to check out what kind of programs that we do, because we don't just offer domestic and sexual violence support, like counseling and case management, but we also provide other things. So you just heard a little bit about the prevention program. We are in the schools, but we also offer financial counseling. We have a feeding program in King and Queen, and Project Discovery, which is our post-secondary resources for high schoolers. But yeah, check out that website just to sort of see everything that we're doing and know what's kind of going on in your area.
So while other people might be typing up their questions, I did have one myself, or actually a couple. So what would you say is a line between wanting to help someone that you know is in an intimate partner violence type of relationship, and meeting someone kind of where they are by not pushing them, not judging them? I mean, of course it's blurred, but do you have any type of advice on how to kind of walk that tight line?
Do you want to take this one, Carmina?
Sure.
Okay.
And then you can add on if you want. So the thing that's so tricky about it, right, is that we kind of want to bring in our forefront that power and control wheel. So that, that person who's experienced the harm has already had that sort of power and control taken away from them. So we really want to be mindful of that when we're approaching that person. So the best thing really is try to just come up with a bunch of different resources, talk to them about it, and then, see what kind of path that they want to go to. If they're like, that all sounds really great, maybe I should go to a counselor because this has been in my mind constantly, then talk about how can we do that together, right? Do you want me to call them? Do you want me to help you out with that? The reason why I say think about that power and control wheel is because I know it's so easy. It can be easy for folks to be like, you need to break up with them. Or I'm going to, stop talking to you or whatever it is, right? Is that they might shut down. They might not want to talk to you anymore. And then going back to that isolation power and control wheel, right? What more harm can that do? And so really, I know it can be really hard to see our loved one get hurt, but really just being there for them, even if it's just being present, even if it's silence and just like, hey, I'm here to talk whenever. That's so crucial.
And kind of hopping onto what Carmina was saying, some people may be like, oh, that didn't happen. This is not something that's going on. You overheard, you misheard, this is not what's happening. Just kind of supporting them still and just being like, okay, well, here's some resources I found if you're interested in looking at them. I thought they were pretty cool, but maybe just kind of still giving them and not pushing to ask maybe more questions, but also giving those resources and kind of making them feel as though even though that something may be going on, you're not going to leave them or kind of push at them and make them want to talk to you, because that could cause some also more isolation from the support team.
Right. And so, of course, you see a lot of people in this type of situation. But how many, like on average, how many people would you say leave their abusive partner while they're in your confidence, if you will? Or how long do you think is the average between somebody coming to an organization like Thrive and then being able to take that step, if it's an intimate partner relationship, to leave that person?
I wouldn't say there's a very good average on it, because I feel like people who come to us, sometimes they have different resources, they have different types of things going on in their life. So some could come and they could not have children, others could come and could have children. Some may need to go through like a court process, where others just need kind of shelter. So that's a very tricky question. I'm not sure if Carmina can answer, but I'm not entirely sure. But I think it definitely depends on the person and what resources that they currently have and kind of where they want to go. Because if they're just maybe looking for some support, some resources, some of the maybe prevention and outreach, things like that we offer, and maybe not leaving their partner just yet, we'll still help them and continue to support them. But that may not be something that they're willing to look in for several months. So it's just kind of being there and supporting them through their time.
Yeah. And that's a really good response, is like, it might vary from person to person. What I will say though, is like, when it comes to the cycle of abuse that Rebecca was talking about, I know there was some sort of statistic that said on an average, it takes on an average of 7 to 8 times for the cycle to occur for the person to successfully leave that relationship. I'm not totally sure if that has been updated or in any sort of case, and it could just potentially be an average. But again, I do agree with Rebecca that it's a case-by-case basis. Yeah, and there was more to that. I guess too, if you wanted to look more into it, a person can sort of look into like stages of change, because I think that's a huge influence as to where the person is at and if they're willing to, you know, go forward with certain things, or if they're not ready to. But yeah.
Well, that's actually a really important thing for people to know, though, because I think it's kind of set in our minds that if you reach out to an organization, it's kind of like, well, you have to be ready. You have to be ready to go anytime. Whereas if somebody doesn't feel like they're ready to leave yet, but they do need some advice or they need someone to talk to, it's great for them to know that it doesn't mean that just because you reach out to an organization, you just have to be ready to go. So that's a really cool thing to be able to provide someone, even if it's just the tiniest bit of like an ear to listen to if they don't have any friends in the same area. That's a really good thing to provide.
Yeah, and thank you for highlighting that too, because I mean, if a client comes in one day and then they're not seen for like 10 months and come back, we're gonna welcome them. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I really appreciate you highlighting that.
So, I mean, I think I've hogged it enough. Do we have any other questions? All right.
So there's a question in the chat.
Okay.
What is the difference between a couple having a heated fight and a couple abusing each other in a heated fight? That's a good question. So I think more of a, that would be more of like a domestic abuse when the couple was arguing and maybe got physical with each other or emotionally abusive. That could definitely be classified as domestic violence. And also a heated fight, I feel like could also be classified if it went like a certain way, like if there was any kind of abuse in that could fall under that. But if it was maybe like a simple where they just both got very upset with each other and emotional, it would kind of depend, I guess, on the fight and if it was if there was any abuse happening in it, even if it was just emotional and maybe not physical.
And what I'll add to that too is kind of just throwing a question out there of like, how does that person feel about the situation, right? Are they looking at this power and control wheel and it's sort of like resonating with them of, wow, what happened in this heated argument makes me feel like this, right? Because I think there's a lot of power in how do you feel and why do you feel that way, right? So like we can provide all of this information, but it's really up to that person to sort of like, you know, come to some sort of end of like what's going on for them, right?
And if that's all our questions from our audience.
So yeah, I mean, we have the contact information, of course, on the PowerPoint here, and we'll be posting that. But we also, yeah, and you can flip right to it. And all those other organizations sound great. You can always call the library anytime. We have 10 branches at Pamunkey. We would be happy to provide you with any information on how to reach any of these organizations and connect you to anyone that you might need. So if there's no other questions, I wanted to thank Rebecca and Carmina for presenting all this. I think it's a really important topic, and we're really grateful that you were able to provide all this information.
Thank you for having us and giving us your time and your space to come into and talk about these things. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, and then thank you all for joining. Like I said, if you have any questions, just let us know.
Okay.